Hello, junkies. Welcome to Nocturnal Throwback, the podcast where we re-podcast the original Nocturnal podcast from 2007. Way back when I wrote a chapter a week, recorded it on Saturday, and released it on Sunday. The grand experiment that wound up being the Crown Publishing major hardback release in 2013 and is now in development as a TV series. You can't see this, but I made the quote marks, air quote marks for in development. So what does quote in development, end quote, mean? It means we have a snowball's chance in hell of getting Nocturnal made into a TV show. So you're saying there's a chance. The screenwriter for the pilot is Danny Bilson, who penned the script for the new Spike Lee movie, Da 5 Bloods. The producer is Lloyd Levin, who was a producer for Da 5 Bloods and is also one of the producers for the original Hellboy, possibly the most beautiful monster movie ever shot. Lloyd gets monster characters and Bilson is great. Both of these guys are made people in Hollywood. They do a lot of cool stuff. They've done a lot of cool stuff. That said, they and I have been at this for 7 years. I've been trying to get Nocturnal made into a TV show for 7 years. These things, they take time. And usually these kind of things just don't go anywhere at all. But we are still trying. That is how we do here at Empty Set Entertainment. We try, and eventually we will win. GFL 6, The Gangster, is finished. I have sent the final draft off to Big John Vizcara, the Siglerverse continuity czar. Big John reviews the first draft of my books, then the second draft, and then the final draft. He is the man. He goes through and finds a lot of the details that I've missed. He has a much better mind for the Siglerverse and keeping track of all the minutia than I do. So he's a huge part of creating these books. So when he is done with his edit, I make whatever corrections he points out, and then boom, it's off to production. Boom. There, we sent it out to production twice. We do not have a release date yet. That is it for the news and notes this week. I now turn the show over to baby podcaster Scott. Remember that when I released Nocturnal originally, I had been podcasting for less than 2 years. You might be able to hear a slight difference between what you're hearing now and what is coming up from way back in 2007. I hope you guys are digging the story. Let's get into it. Here comes Nocturnal Throwback, episode number 18. Welcome to the free podcast novel, Nocturnal, episode number 18, the most disturbing episode yet. Nocturnal is a podcast-only novel you can't buy in stores and you can't peek at the end. Written and performed by Scott Sigler. More information and more free stories available at scottsigler.com. This book contains adult language, mature situations, and lots of violence. Hello there, junkies. Episode 18 of Nocturnal. We're going to get right into the story, but first, let me tease you, let me tantalize you with all the juicy stuff that's coming up to talk about after the episode. We've got cool updates to the Google Maps. I've got links showing the history of the buried ships of San Francisco. This shit's for real, y'all. I didn't make this up. I got a starred review in Publishers Weekly for Infected, which is just crazy. Talk about my new guest blog over at amctv.com, the Michael Myers Makeover. Pictures of the Infected hardcover are in, and I have posted those for you. We'll talk about March 16th being the final day to register at scottsigler.com and be considered an original junkie. Don't forget Infected. Episode number 2 is coming up tomorrow in this very same feed. And now let's get into the story so far by none other than original junkie, Wired Pig.
Hey everybody, this is Wired Pig, and without further ado, let's get into the story so far. Rex Depravdichuk is realizing his destiny. An outcast, beaten and tormented by family and classmates, the 13-year-old Rex has seen his enemies die horrible deaths at the hands of Marie's children, a shadowy cult that lives in the shadows of San Francisco. Marie's children finally came for Rex, embracing him as family, as their king. Rex entered the underground home of Marie's children and met his people for the first time. San Francisco homicide detectives Brian Clauser and Pookie Chang descended into the dark basement of Jebediah Erikson, also known as the Savior. Without a search warrant, they are breaking the law, yet are backed up by John, Black Mr. Burns, and Big Tonda Murphy, two cops that owe their lives to Brian's past heroics. After a long search, Bryan and Pookie found a hidden room and entered. The episode ended as Pookie screamed in fear. Their gunfire echoed off the stone walls.
It wasn't the first time they'd attacked his house, and it wouldn't be the last. Every 10 years or so, one of them got stupid enough to forget what happened to the last one or two, and they came for him. They knew right where his house was. All they had to do was come over and kill him. He killed every nocturnal he found, but the ones that came for his house, well, he made an example out of them. Lafayette Park was 1 block north of his house, the highest point in San Francisco. The tallest tree there rose up 100 feet off the ground, giving him a commanding view of the front of his house. Sometimes, if they were slow and overconfident, he could take them out from here. That had happened back in '86 and in '94. In '86, there had been only one assailant who couldn't even get through the front door. That had been one of the stupid ones. It just stood there, waiting for him to come outside. He still counted that as his greatest shot ever, a headshot from 350 feet away. In '94, there were 2 of them. He'd hit one on the leg, enough to keep it from running. Its buddy ran, of course, because the things were cowards, but the wounded one, Savior had dragged it into the basement and skinned it alive while it was still screaming. Sometimes they used the back door, sometimes the windows, sometimes the roof. One industrious little bastard had even tunneled in. He killed them all. Savior scaled the tree, so silent the morning birds didn't even move. The rising sun blazed on his right, casting long, pale shadows from one building to the next. When he reached the top, he had to stop and think. There was a police cruiser in front of his house, red and blue lights flashing. Just one car, no siren. The flashing lights in the distance made it hard to see, but he made out 2 uniformed police and a third man, not in uniform. He could also make out the front door, busted wide open. It wasn't the first time the police had come to his house after a break-in, but he had to be careful. You never knew when these things would get clever and try a new tactic. They seem smarter these days, trying to avoid his wrath by using technology like cell phones and pagers, even computers. He stashed the bow and quiver in the tree. Those weren't very effective close-up anyway. He pulled off his cloak, wrapping the pistol, the grenade bandolier, clips, and other gear inside. He'd keep that close, just in case. The knife, he moved to the small of his back, under his shirt. That didn't seem like much weaponry against these monsters, but it had never failed him before. And sometimes, the knife was just plain more fun. The stone basement filled with 2 sounds, the fading echo of the gunshots and their heavy panting. Adrenaline raged through Pookie's body, making his heart kick so bad he wondered if left arm pain was right around the corner. "Congratulations! You just killed a stuffed bear, you dumbass!" "Me? Hey, I fired twice. You fired 4 fucking times." "Only because I always back my partner's play." It was big, and it was stuffed, as evidenced by the dry strands of dark orange fur floating in their flashlight beams. But it wasn't a bear. Bears don't have opposable thumbs and 4 eyes. Just inside the hidden door, Bryan found a light switch. He flicked it on. They stared into the room for a long time, just flat out not knowing what to say. "Hey, Bri," Pookie said finally. "Yeah?" "You know what? That this is some pretty fucked up shit." Pookie nodded. "Damn straight." Bad taxidermy filled Erikson's secret room. Bad taxidermy of nightmare creatures. The 4-eyed, mottled orange-furred stuffed creature they'd seen with the flashlights when they first walked in, it stood at least 7 feet tall, Pookie reached his hand out and touched it. The fur felt dry, stiff, and brittle. "This thing would have weighed at least 500 pounds. And with 4 eyes, it sure as fuck would see you coming. Which one of these do you think is the spookiest?" Bryan turned to look at him. "Hell, man," he said, arms sweeping wide to take in the freak show. "Just take your fucking pick." Old Four Eyes had rear legs the size of oil barrels and long front arms that hung down to the ground. It would have walked half upright, gorilla style, and made a hell of a ground thump if it got up ahead of steam. 2 bullets had hit the body, one in the shoulder and one in the thigh, ripping off chunks of fur and showing a white material beneath. 2 more had each taken out a glass eye. Somehow, Pookie knew that both the headshots were Bryan's. The bastard. Burnt orange fur covered Old Four Eyes, right up to 4 bushy eyebrows that jutted out from 4 thick eye ridges. The eyes were so fucked up, so out there, that they almost made you miss the mouthful of pointy, inch-long teeth. Seeing that face had sent Pookie into an instant panic, because in the bouncing flashlight beams it looked like the thing was moving, coming right for them. Pookie wouldn't say it, but he'd grabbed his sack shortly after the shooting to make sure he hadn't pissed himself. As a child, Pookie had been plagued with nightmarish monsters. His dad had let him watch Nightmare on Elm Street at the tender age of 7, an act Pookie still constituted as blatant child abuse. Freddy Krueger couldn't hold a candle to half the creatures in this room. The other half, well, they were even more nightmarish because of their familiarity. "This one looks like a goddamn accountant," Bryan said. Pookie walked over to join him. It was a stuffed man. A stuffed man. A stuffed man with glasses slightly bent at the right temple, wearing Dockers, brown loafers, a white shirt with a blue sweater vest, eyes odd, nice gator bro, and feathered blonde hair. Oh, and the man was holding a tomahawk. A tomahawk with dried blood on it, crusted around a few strands of hair. Bryan leaned into the tomahawk and pointed at it. "Hey, is that a piece of a tooth?" Pookie leaned forward to look. Yeah, that there is a tooth. A child's tooth, by the looks of it." Pookie had never seen human taxidermy. Even so, if there was such a profession, whoever had done this was a long ways from getting his union certification. The accountant's skin looked taut and leathery. He wore a smile, but Pookie couldn't be sure if that was from too tight skin or an odd sense of humor from the artist that put this whole thing together. 2 blue glass eyes, one looking quite normal and staring straight, one slightly out of kilter and looking about 15 degrees to the right. Pookie tore himself away from the horror show. He wanted to take in the whole room before individual details dragged him down. Stuffed monsters of all sorts lined the walls of the 20-foot by 40-foot room. Furry, muscular, skinny, tall, short, fat. One massive, muscular 600-pounder, and one that looked an awful lot like a predatory human-beetle hybrid. At least 6 of the stuffed critters were people, 3 men, 2 women, and one evil-looking little bastard that couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Maybe more than that looked human, but it was hard to tell at first glance because the critters were stacked 2 and 3 deep in most places. Some looked relatively fresh, while some looked real old. Skin and fur peeling back from the seams, big bald patches where fur or hair or scales had fallen off. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no fur on the floor beneath said bald patches. Someone kept this room immaculate. Pookie assumed that was from the 3 central vac outlets spaced around the room. That was the outside of the room, a ring of old death. The inside of the room, that promised future deaths. An oak and stainless steel workbench, a rack that Pookie assumed had something to do with bow maintenance and repair, based on the unstrung bow sitting in the middle of it. One end of the workbench held a barrel full of arrow shafts, and a polished steel rack holding 24 gleaming arrowheads in 4 neat rows of 6 arrowheads each. The other end of the bench held a custom gun rack, holding 2 matched handguns and 2 assault rifles. "He's got 2 5.7s, Pookie said, pointing to the Fabrique National 5.7mm handguns. Bryan stared at the FNs. Their powerful 5.7 by 28mm cartridge could punch through typical Kevlar body armor, then tumble through the body behind that armor. The bullet's tumbling action would open up a huge wound channel, far larger than the small diameter of the bullet itself. "There's space for 3 FNs on the rack, but there's only 2 here," Bryan said. "He might have one on him. Look at these M16-looking things. I've never seen these before." The boxy weapons had a thick composite stock, flat black body with a rail handle on top, a long magazine curved slightly forward, and a mid-length barrel. It sort of looked like an M16, if an M16 juiced up on steroids. "That there, my ninja friend, is a USAS-12 12-gauge semi-automatic shotgun. That son of a bitch can kick out 10 shots in about 5 seconds. Clears out a room faster than a Mr. Biznass bacon fart." "Erikson is as old as my grandpa was. I remember my grandpa. He played chess and shit. Don't most grandpas just play chess and shit?" Pookie nodded. "I'm sure they do. And when Erikson plays, I think I just go ahead and let him win. Let's keep looking and finish up, Bri. The arrowheads are here like you thought, but it's still an illegal search and we can't have much time left before someone comes home." They gathered around him. So many shapes, so many sizes, so many colors. They all walked up to him, sniffed him, and after sniffing, they all said the same thing. The king. Most weren't as scary looking as Pierre and Sly and Servo and Fort. There were a few a little worse, like the one with the blue scales that looked like a boll weevil. A few, mostly women, looked like regular people. A little one pushed through the crowd. It had a wide smile that showed tiny, stubby teeth. It had some flappy thing between the smile and its high-up nose. Kind of looked like a pussy, poor guy. He wore raggedy clothes, just like the rest, all dirty, smelly, and tore up. "I'm Sucka," he said. "We have waited for you, waited for so long." Sucka stuck out a yellow hand and Rex shook it. Sucka. Somehow, he knew this man. "You killed Principal Solar, didn't you?" Sucka bowed. "All in service of the king." These people, his family, they killed for him. They would do whatever he told them to do. He, Rex Depravdichuk, was the boss. Sly stepped forward. "Back up, everyone. Give the king some room. Where is Firstborn?" The mention of the name sent a hush through the collected group. They looked at Sly, then at Rex. It was like Sly had reminded them of something very important. "He's out," Sucka said. "He has a meeting with some Russians or something. Man, it's going to be wild when he gets back." "Who is Firstborn?" Rex asked. The way the creatures in the crowd acted at the mention of that name, like they were afraid to speak, as if they'd get into trouble. "He's our leader," Sucka said. "He is the voice of Mommy." "He was the voice, you mean," Sly said. "The king is here now. Mommy and Firstborn told us this day would come, and here it is." "What is this place?" Rex asked. "I mean, I know it's home. I can feel it's home, but those are like ships and stuff. Underground. What is it?" "This is the bay," Servo said. "The real bay. Everything you're standing on, and the downtown area above us. In the early 1800s, this was all water." "Well, did it dry up?" "No, it was filled in. When the gold rush hit, ships would sail into the bay and the entire crew would abandon ship to seek their treasure. By 1850, there were already 500 ships in the harbor and more came. Some ships rotted, some burned, some sank. Some were cut up for wood and some were turned into floating businesses like bars and hotels. They built longer piers out into the water and eventually started filling everything in to make more land. Many of the ships were just buried." "Wow. Well, where are we then?" "Where we are standing now is just under the corner of Front Street and Pacific." Rex blinked. He connected the dots. The feeling he had in his special park, the one place he could get away from everyone, he had that same feeling here, only far more intense. The park, his park, the place he was drawn, was almost directly above them. "How big is all this?" Rex asked. "It covers several blocks.
Many of us live in the Alamandrolina and the Ricardo. Mommy and some children dug holes when they were putting up buildings, dug into the ground to hide. She had more children, and they dug her even deeper. They found the ships and turned them into home. We have been here ever since. We have 7 ships and many tunnels that lead all through the city."
Rex heard all the words, but one really stuck in his head. He had family now. He knew he had family because he could feel it, and he had a home. But there was one thing he didn't have. He'd never had, and Roberta hadn't even come close. Did you say, Mommy? Servo nodded, as did all the others.
"How old was she when she died?" "She's not dead," Servo said. "She is here, in home, with us."
But that can't be right. Rex denied it, yet he felt the blast of excitement in his whole body.
"You said she dug the tunnels in the 1850s.
Everyone nodded.
"But that would mean she's like 160 years old or something like that."
Servo laughed. It was a thin laugh.
"She's much older than that. Much older. That's when she first arrived from New York, alone, cold, and carrying firstborn."
"She's alive?" Rex said. "She's alive and she's my mother?" Everyone nodded solemnly. "Well, where is she?"
"She cannot be bothered now," Servo said. "She is soon to take a husband. The ceremony is always private, but afterwards you can watch the groom's march."
"A wedding? Mommy's getting married?" Sly laughed.
"In a manner of speaking," Servo said. "Come, let us show you all around home."
"So what's the deal, BMB?" Tonda asked. "What's up with the ninja?" Black Mr. Burns shrugged.
"The ninja needs us. Does that really matter what's up?"
Tonda rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't go give me that shit, BMB. That's not what I'm saying. Bryan needs us. Bryan's got us. We're here, right?" Black Mr. Burns nodded. Tonda turned to Chi Yen, who was out on the sidewalk, hand on his gun, eyes constantly sweeping left, then right. "We're here, ain't we, baby?" Chi nodded without turning away from his visual sweep. "So there you go, BMB. We're here. So you've got to have theories. Come on. What do you think's going on?"
"Can't you just hang out, Tonda? You're such a gossip."
"Gossip passes the time, baby. I'm just standing here and need something to do. I mean, look at that door. Bryan did that?" Black Mr. Burns gave her a hard look.
"No, the perp did that. Bryan's not even here, remember?"
Tonda shrugged and looked away. "Yeah, that's right. Perp did it. So we going in after that perp or what?" Black Mr. Burns shook his head in exasperation.
"Tonda, come on. Can't you just hang out?"
"Can I help you, officers?" The voice caught them off guard, making all 3 cops jump, making hands shoot to the hilts of weapons. Between them and the house stood a little old man, wearing black slacks and a dark brown button-up shirt. In the glow of the early morning sun and the flashing red and blue light from the cop cruiser, his thinning white hair seemed to float above his scalp. They hadn't seen him coming. They hadn't heard him coming. He was just there, like a fucking ghost.
"Stay right where you are, sir,"
Black Mr. Burns said, his pulse hammering from the surprise appearance.
"Identify yourself."
"I'm Jebediah Erikson. This is my house. What is happening?"
"There's been a break-in, sir," Black Mr. Burns said. "Officers have entered the premises, but the perpetrators could still be inside. Please step out to the sidewalk with Officer Yen."
"I'm fine where I'm at," Erikson said. "Who are you?"
"Officer John Smith, San Francisco Police Department, sir."
"Please produce identification." Black Mr. Burns cursed under his breath. "God damn it, Pookie, get out here." He pulled out his badge and started to walk the 10 feet to the old man. "Stop right there," Erikson said. A small voice, but firm and full of command.
"Excuse me, sir?"
"Just throw me the badge, officer. I don't know if you are the police or something like the police, so just keep your distance." Black Mr. Burns couldn't help but take a quick glance over his shoulder at the cop cruiser. the lights, and the 2 uniforms. Tonda was on her cell phone, probably calling Pookie. People almost never asked for proof that a cop was a cop, especially with a scene like this. The old man's house had been broken into. Not only did that not seem to faze him, not even a little bit, but he was pressing the police for proper identification. John gently tossed the badge to the old man. He looked at it carefully, then walked up and handed it back to John. The old man couldn't have been more than 5'7". "Thank you, officer."
"Of course," John said. "Now if I could impose upon you to return the favor."
"I don't have any identification, officer. Why are the police in my house?"
"We're making sure the perps aren't in there, sir. The robbers."
"Get the police out. Right now. You don't have a search warrant, and I'm sure the thief is long gone."
"Mr. Erikson, now we don't know that—"
"I said get them out of my house." John nodded and turned towards the house, only to see Pookie descending the front steps. A thin, dull chain hung around his neck, holding a badge that bounced in time with each step.
"Officer Smith," Pookie said, "the house appears to be clear." "Detective Chang, this is Jebediah Erikson," Black Mr. Burns said. "He said this is his house, but he doesn't have any identification."
Pookie nodded. He kept a good 4-foot cushion on Erikson. If John didn't know better, he'd have sworn that Pookie looked afraid of the diminutive old man.
"It's 7 o'clock in the morning, sir. Care to explain what you're doing out at this time?"
"No, I don't care to explain. The last time I checked, I didn't need identification or a reason to walk outside of my house. Are you the police or are you the Gestapo?" John and Pookie both bristled at the comment. San Francisco liberals were infamous for lumping the SFPD with fascists, Nazis, secret police of any kind. Of course, John had to admit the man had a point this time. Bryan had broken in an illegal search without a warrant. At least John hoped it was just a search. "Are there any other officers inside my house?" Erikson said. Pookie nodded.
"Yes, sir. One more officer."
"We'll get him out of there. Now. Before I call the chief of police." Pookie smiled. It was an evil smile.
"Let me guess, Mr. Erikson. The chief is a personal friend of yours."
"Amy Zou and I are well acquainted," Erikson said. "And if you don't—" His voice trailed off, and he stared at the front door of his house. John turned to follow the gaze. Bryan Clouser, the ninja, stood on the top step. Bryan's mouth hung halfway open in surprise, the badge hanging from his neck reflecting the flashing red and blue lights. John, Black Mr. Burns Smith, then turned back to look at Erikson. The old man also wore a look of surprise, but it faded quickly, replaced by an expression that seemed alien on an old man's face. A thin-lipped expression of focused rage, like a look on the face of mixed martial arts fighters right before the rest screams, "Let's get it on!" The look lasted only 1 second, or at least that's all Black Mr. Burns had time to see, before the old man's foot slammed into his stomach. All the wind shot out of John's lungs. He flew back 3 feet, landing on his ass, hands moving to clutch at his stomach as his diaphragm froze up tight. The old man was so fast. John hadn't even landed before Erikson had jumped in the air and spun, his right leg sweeping around in a full circle to smash into Pookie Chang's temple. Pookie dropped like a sack of bricks, but Erikson was already moving before the chubby Chinese cop even hit the ground. John saw Erikson rushing for Tonda, saw Tonda reaching for her gun, saw Bryan coming off the front step. Before she could clear her holster, Erikson hit her with a hard left to the side of her neck. Her hands flew up, her gun clattered to the driveway's pavement. Bryan hit Erikson in a flying tackle, hit him hard, smashing the little old man into the cruiser with so much force that the passenger door crumpled in and the glass shattered. Bryan reared back to punch, but Erikson's feet seemed to shoot out from inside the ruined car, wrapping around Bryan's head in a figure-4 leg lock. Bryan's eyes went wide with surprise, first from the speed, then from the fact that he couldn't draw a single ounce of air. Erikson cranked down on the leg lock, keeping it tight. He pushed back with his hands against the trash cruiser and the 2 men fell to the sidewalk. Bryan on his back, Erikson still on top, still holding the vicious leg lock. John couldn't move, still couldn't even breathe. It had all happened so fast, the whole thing in less than 4 seconds. Erikson's hand shot behind his back and returned with a K-bar knife glinting in the flashing red and blue lights. Bryan saw the knife and kicked, trying to escape even as he fought in vain to draw a breath. The old man snarled, a horrid expression on someone so old, and raised the knife high. Wie Chi Yen came around the cruiser and laid Erikson out in a full tackle, his squat, powerhouse body ripping the old man right off of Bryan. The knife spun in midair, then clattered against the sidewalk concrete. Erikson and Yen slid across the sidewalk, scraping clothes and skin. Chi tried to stay on top, but Erikson shifted, squirmed, twisted his body so it slid out from under Chi. Erikson sprang to his feet, holding Wie Chi Yen's gun. John still couldn't breathe, but he reached for his own gun, his hand shaky, his body weak. Just as Chi planted a foot on the sidewalk to stand up, Erikson stepped forward and pistol whipped him right in the mouth. A bloody chunk of tooth flew through the air. Chi sagged to his side, hands holding a mouth already filling with blood. Erikson turned the gun on Bryan, but the ninja was already moving and moving fast, diving over the hood of the cruiser. The gun barked out 2 shots. One bullet punched a neat hole in the cruiser's hood. John finally pulled his gun free, but before he could raise it, Erikson had turned and taken 2 steps. So fast. Nobody is that fast. John Black Mr. Burns stared straight down the barrel of a .40 caliber Sig Sauer P226, only 2 inches from his face. A little curl of smoke slipped out of the barrel, catching the red from one of the cruiser's bubble lights. "Drop it or die," Erikson said. John dropped it. Something silver flashed through the air. Erikson turned towards the motion, his back now to John. In yet another display of impossible speed, the old man fired 3 times, so fast it sounded like a machine gun. Bam, bam, bam! Then the silver thing hit him in the stomach. It hit with a nasty, heavy thunk. John saw a bloody knife tip punch out of Erikson's lower back, just to the left of the spine. That's his kidney, John thought, a random anatomy lesson firing through his brain. Erikson didn't cry out, but he stumbled back 1 step, almost tripping over John. "Oh my God, no," the old man said, in a perfectly calm, perfectly conversational tone. He dropped Chi's gun to the ground, then used both hands to pull the knife from his stomach. John watched the knife tip vanish back into Erikson, then come out the front, a little peekaboo magic worthy of a David Blaine TV special. Erikson held the bloody knife up and just stared at it. "I never planned for this," he said. That voice was calm. Pookie Chang's was not. "Get the fuck down, asshole!" Erikson and John both turned at the sound of Chang's voice. He stood in a shooter's crouch, feet spaced wide apart, both hands on his Glock 9mm. He looked pissed. He looked like he was ready to shoot someone, anyone, even an 80-year-old man. "Get the fuck down, goddammit!" Then Tonda's voice. "Get down, mister!" She too had recovered and had her gun trained on Erikson. Erikson looked at Tonda, then at Chang, then down at John. "Honestly," Erikson said to John, "I never really planned for this." Jebediah Erikson blinked twice, then his head rolled back a little, and he fell to the ground. They got him. Tard watched in utter disbelief. He looked an awful lot like the tree in which he hid. He didn't care much for being a tree, because all the bugs crawled into the cracks in his skin. They tickled, sometimes they bit, trying to bore in or whatever. The monster was down on the ground, a wet circle spreading on his brown shirt. The cops moved in to cuff him. Holy shit. Sly was going to be so excited. Tard would watch what happened for a while. Maybe it was a trick. He'd watch and see, then report back to Sly. The white dungeon gave way to a white hallway. Same poorly fitted stones, same countless slathered-on coats of white enamel paint. Mismatched lights lit the hallway's curved roof. A thick, brown electrical cord, painted over in some parts, ran from light to light, hanging down slightly in some places, nailed up to wood beams in the ceiling in others. Where the ceiling was only stone, the small blocks looked well-fitted, like the angled stones of some medieval craftsman. In more places than not, however, random pieces of rock, tile, and chunks of wood patched the ceiling in a white enamel kaleidoscope of shapes. He could see some smears of blood on the white floor, where they had dragged the Mexican. They had to pass by a brown-robed little man who clumsily mopped away, rinsing the blood in a plastic yellow mop bucket. Aggie would have expected a wooden bucket with a rusted handle, but both the sponge mop and the bucket looked brand new. Aggie James realized something quite sharply. In a way, hope is worse than fear. When you've resigned yourself to death, you're afraid, sure, but somewhere in your head, you finally accept there is nothing you can do about it, and you take the moments as they come. That's well beyond the planning and begging stages, of course. Eventually, you realize that your number is up, and no roll of the dice can come up 7. With acceptance, fear dies down a bit, like background music. That's where he had been, until Hillary dangled hope in front of his eyes. Hope. The hope that he might possibly live. Well, that just ripped the acceptance away and cranked the fear volume up to the level of a heavy metal concert. Now everything he looked at held a potential promise of pain, of death. Could death come at the hands of Hillary? At the little man? At whatever had taken him from under the dumpster back in the street? What could kill him? What should he do? Should he fight? Run? Play along like a good little slave and hope that Massa didn't lay down a beating? Hillary pushed Aggie in front of her, just enough to keep him going, but he could feel the strength each time her hands connected with his body. They moved quickly. He got the feeling she didn't want to be seen. The narrow hall curved and twisted. Soon the white gave way to browns and blacks and grays, the colors of deep earth. Other tunnels branched off. No pattern, no regularity, just branches and branches. The dirt hallway seemed to widen at one point, and Hillary pushed him into a side tunnel. Aggie walked in, eager to please, but she grabbed him, turned him, and held him close so she could look him right in the eye. Her mouth close enough to kiss, she whispered to him,
"What you see now, no one sees. Not even some of us. You be very quiet. You go where I tell you. You make one noise, they will tear you to pieces. You understand?" Aggie gave a short little nod. Couldn't nod too far, or he'd headbutt her. She let him go, then pushed him through a hall so cramped he had to turn sideways to move. The dirt and stone walls pressed up against his face and chest. The walls looked like an archaeological dig. Dirt and stone, sure, but also blackened wooden boards, bits of furniture, timbers, broken glass bottle bits, ceramic shards, rusty metal bits like old tools, nails, and pipes. Here, the ceiling was not the fine craftsmanship of an artisan gone by. This was a tunnel dug by layman's hands. The junk hallway led up at a considerable angle, and after only 20 steps, he was already a little winded. As he climbed, a heavy scent started to fill the air. It wasn't a perfume. It was thicker, more animal. He stopped to take a deep breath through his nose. Whatever it was, he couldn't get enough of that smell. "Hurry," Hillary hissed. "You must see this." She pushed him, and he kept climbing. Of all things, his dick twitched. He couldn't possibly be horny at a time like this, could he? The floor leveled out. Aggie found himself in a tiny room with wooden floorboards, but it was so small he had to move in on his hands and knees. The floor was really no floor at all, but a random collection of metal grates and old jail cell bars set into the ground so that you could look down into the dark void below. He could see a few candles down there, maybe 15, 20 feet away. Their feeble light flickered across a big, patchwork tarp that covered a mound of something. There wasn't enough light to make it out. "We made it in time," Hillary whispered.
We made it for what?
To see what will happen to you if you don't do what I say.
A few more candles moved into the room. Aggie could barely make out the brown-robed little men in the tiny spheres of light. They were entering the room below, carrying the candles, moving about with some unknown purpose. More entered. The room grew slightly brighter, as did the light on the patchwork tarp, one small candle flame at a time. Something moved at one end of the tarp, the end closest to the door the little men used to bring the candles. Then a sound, a tiny, bleating sound, like a sheep maybe? One of the little men reached under the tarp, but it was so hard to make anything out. The little man seemed to pick something up with his long front arms, pull the thing to his chest, then turn and walk out, walking past the candles that seemed to keep floating in.
You make no noise. They see you. You die.
That smell. What was it? Aggie felt blood rushing to his head. His face felt hot, and his dick started to stiffen. Candles stopped moving as the little men set them down, then turned and walked out, moving by other little men, bringing in more candles. A slow-motion procession full of their little whispers. Tinny music started playing from inside the room. A metallic sound, maybe somebody plinking a harp. The room was brighter but still faint. Aggie made out a white wooden table when a little man started lighting a bunch of candles, all tall and parallel, in metal stands on top of that table. No, they weren't parallel candles. It was a candelabra. And wait, it wasn't a table. It was a tiny piano. The white wood was square only on one end and curved on the other. A piano looked like one of those long, flat grand pianos, but smaller. More candles. The small piano wasn't really white, but more of a pale yellow, the paint chewed up and scarred, showing dark wood beneath. Faded flower patterns decorated the chipped paint. Aggie's hands locked on the iron bars beneath him. He lowered his face, staring between the cold, rusty bars at the strangeness unfolding below him. His dick was fully erect now, poking out from his second-hand pajamas. Not just erect, it was so hard it hurt. More candles. Wait, was that tarp moving?
Now they bring the groom.
Aggie couldn't look away. The groom? What the fuck? Hillary had said this would happen to him, but what was happening? That tarp was moving, not just the end. Oh no, dear Jesus, the whole thing was moving. What the fuck was underneath that thing? It can't be alive, it just can't, because it's bigger than a fucking goddamn elephant. It had to be an elephant, because it moved as one thing, one huge thing. More candles. The room filled with a steady glow. The flickering, now only punctuation and not the entire sentence.
You do what I say, or you will be the husband.
The squeaking of wheels. A dolly, the kind movers use, rolling in, pushed by a little man. And on that dolly, strapped down so tight, the Mexican.
Remember, no noise.
Hillary was close to him now. So close, he could feel her hot breath on his ear, sending tingles up his spine. He wanted her. His throbbing cock called out to him to take her. But how could he want her? She'd kept him prisoner. She helped kill people. The little men laid the dolly down so that the Mexican was strapped down and on his back. Even from here, Aggie could see the man's erection pitching a tent in his pajamas as well. The little men gathered at the tarp, ruffling it, preparing to move it. The flapping of the giant cloth sent waves of that smell up to him, and Aggie James had to blink away the lust, had to lower his head to the iron bars beneath him, had to fight the pure heat that roiled through his body.
You do what I say,
Hillary said,
or it will be you that experiences Mommy's love.
The room now filled with soft candlelight, the tiny chords of the little piano plinking along. The little men yanked the tarp away. Aggie James had been told not to scream, not to make any noise at all. So he bit down on the iron bars instead, tasting rust. He bit so hard, his right molar cracked. There you go, junkies. I hope you enjoyed episode number 18. So let's go over this laundry list of fun stuff I have to talk about this week. First of all, I've plotted the buried ships on the Google map that represents all the locations in Nocturnal. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes at scottzigler.com. I'm actually putting in little ship markers to show you where these ships are buried under the city. And this is all true stuff. There really are buried ships under San Francisco. Back in the 1850s, all the ships came in, and they wound up leaving just hundreds and hundreds of ships abandoned in the bay. Sometimes those ships got converted for other uses. Sometimes they just got sunk. Sometimes they burned. Eventually, the city filled in a huge chunk of the bay to make more land. And most of what is downtown San Francisco is now actually landfill that wasn't there before. That's why there is an area in San Francisco called North Beach. And yet it's not a beach at all. It used to be the beach, but once they filled in all the land, it's not a beach anymore. The Publishers Weekly Starred Review. This is kind of a big deal for podcasting fiction in general. It's a fun big deal for me, but I think it's a much bigger deal for all of podcast fiction writers. Publishers Weekly is the main trade publication for the publishing industry. It is really the only one. It's the big daddy. They go through and they do the reviews, and it's not like Oprah. It's not like they come out and say, well, this is a great book, therefore the book blows up and becomes a huge hit. But what it does mean is bookstores and book buyers and other reviewers will pay attention to a starred review in Publishers Weekly. From what the guys at Crown have told me and my agent have told me, it's relatively unusual for a horror story to get a starred review, particularly from a new author. So it's a little bit of a coup on our part. It's an indicator of potentially of good things to come. It is not any kind of a christening. But what's more important is Infected started out as just a podcast, a novel. It's this free novel we gave away online, gave it away on podiobooks.com, and now here is the same book. It's been updated, sure, for the print version, but here's the same book in magazines that are just full of books that go through the normal literary process, and Infected lands a starred review. So that really shows that the kind of content that you can get for free that Seth Harwood and J.C. Hutchins and Mur Lafferty and T. Morris and everybody's providing is there's some good crap out there that's going to go toe-to-toe with everything else that's on the market. So all the stuff that's out there on podiobooks.com, you never know what's going to come popping out of there next. So go over there and listen. Why? Because our stuff's free. I have another guest blog posted at amctv.com this week. This time it is the Michael Myers makeover. I kind of feel that Michael Myers has been wearing the same duds for 30 years. It's time to get that boy tricked out. Let's get him ready to go out in the town. You know what I'm saying? So you should swing over to amctv.com and check that out. Or, of course, we'll have a link in the show notes at scottzigler.com. Speaking of what's at scottzigler.com, the hardcovers for Infected came in. Crown sent me 2 hardcovers, and I'm just blown away. This is the coolest book cover I have ever seen. Of course, I am biased because it's my book cover. And yet still, best book cover ever. Even if I did not have this giant, overly inflated ego, this puffed up self-image, which is just huge. I mean, it's gigantic. Still would look at this book cover and go, that is freaking nails. That book cover is nails. So I posted pictures of the book cover and the blog at scottzigler.com. It's a couple of blog posts down from where you're looking at Nocturnal number 18. Again, I'll put in a link in the notes. You guys definitely want to check that out. More stuff at scottzigler.com. March 16th is the final day to be considered an original junkie. Now, if you already have a profile up at scottzigler.com, you are totally in the clear. Everybody who has a profile there now is an original junkie. What we did is when we set up this site way back when, we wanted to have some way of signifying the people who were there before all the media hits for Infected. So like the Starred Review and Publishers Weekly and all the advertising Crown is going to be doing, all this stuff coming up. A lot of new people are going to be coming into the fold to check out the stories. And that's freaking awesome. And they're all going to be junkies, and I will own their immortal soul just like I own your immortal soul. But we really wanted a way just to give a little tip of the hat, a little thank you to the people who've been there from square one, before there was advertising, before there were reviews in Publishers Weekly, before there were hardcovers. So if you're listening to the sound of my voice right now, then you should go to scottsigler.com. You should sign yourself up with a profile. Up till March 16th, you will have original junkie status. I'm not friggin' Oprah, and it's not going to get you a free friggin' car, okay? It's just going to be a little logo on your profile. That's going to be a little badge of honor for you. If you want the free friggin' car, why don't you go listen to Oprah? Why don't you go get your Oprah tickets and go sit in Oprah? What? Oh, my OJ icon isn't good enough for you people? Be called an original junkie? That's not good enough? You've got to have a free friggin' car? Well, go listen to somebody else's podcast because I don't have that kind of scratch. I mean, if I did, I'd give the cars away. Maybe. Maybe I'd lease them at a competitive rate. That seems more in line with someone who wants to take over the world and just giving them away. So don't forget, Infected is coming right down the same feed. I will catch you all next week for Nocturnal 19. Mommy's Big Coming Out Party is Nocturnal episode number 19. And we have to deal with Savior having a nice little silver K-bar all buried up in his belly. I think it's going to be a good time.
You have been listening to Nocturnal, written and performed by Scott Sigler. For more information, go to scottsigler.com. All music in this podcast provided by Uncrowned off their album Devils and Angels, available now at the iTunes Music Store.
Is it